April 1833. St. James Parish, Louisiana, Ashwood Plantation. Here, truth does not enter through the main door. It creeps under the floorboards, it sticks to the soles of shoes, it hides in the folds of a stained apron. And if I start with a date, it is because executioners hate dates. A date is a pin stuck in a lie. A date is evidence that refuses to disappear. Kofi is 28 years old in April 1833. She is presented as a midwife, as if the word were enough to protect her. But here it is not a profession. It is a cleaner chain, a profitable utility, an instrument kept alive because it brings profit. She owns nothing, not even her sleep. She is called when women scream, when children are born, when blood flows, and when the master's house wants the blood to stop. She is called because she knows. And she is hated for the same reason. On Ashwood, birth is an accounting entry. The bodies of black women are a field exploited in the rawest sense of the term. When a woman gives birth, it is not a family growing, it is an inventory increasing. When a baby breathes, it is a future sum. And when a mother no longer breathes, it is merely a depreciable loss. This is the moral setting. This is the ordinary crime. But this case begins when the ordinary crime is compounded by something else. A nocturnal mechanism, dirtier, more secret, whose objective is not merely to own lives, but to turn them into offerings. The first crack opens on an April night in 1833, a night when Amma is not called to a slave cabin but to a plantation building said to be forbidden. It is nicknamed the Accounting Pavilion, an innocent name like those always given to guilty places. Registers, chains, tools, and secrets are kept there. A slave is not allowed to enter, except when her hands are needed, except when violence needs a medical mask. She is fetched abruptly, without explanation, by a panicked boy and an overseer whose voice belongs to no one but the master. Silas Crow, 38 years old, with a dry gait and unwavering gaze. With this kind of man, everything is designed for erasure. No visible anger, no displayed pleasure, only efficiency. He does not say please. He says come. And when a slave walks behind such a man, it is not a movement. It is a transfer of property. Amma crosses the yard. The main house is half asleep, but not really. On a plantation, even silence works. The moon does not illuminate, it watches. The accounting pavilion is closed like a mouth. When the door opens, the air that emerges is not that of an office. It is the air of a room where something was intended to disappear. A metallic smell of oil, of damp earth, and that difficult-to-describe note that the human body leaves behind when injured, a mixture of blood and fear. She is ordered to enter. No questions, no looking up too high. She first sees the floor. Because midwives look at the floor, they know that everything begins there between the feet where evidence falls. And this floor bears marks that should not be there in an accounting pavilion. Dark streaks, lines like repeated rubbing, circular traces as if something had been placed, removed, then placed again. And in a corner, iron bowls, not kitchen bowls, not infirmary basins. Heavy, tarnished objects, pressed against the wall like accomplices. Then she sees a body, not a body laid out to be cared for as one cares, a body positioned to be managed. The man or boy, the light is dim, has fresh incisions, not an accidental injury, short cuts arranged almost methodically like signs. Nothing is explained to her, she is merely told to fix it quickly. Vocabulary always betrays the guilty. They do not say save, they say fix, as if the human were merely a broken tool. And there behind Amma a presence looms. Gideon Ashwood, 42 years old, the master, the man who shakes hands with neighbors on Sunday and holds the whip by proxy on Monday. He has that cold politeness, that way of speaking softly so that others raise their voices and get soiled in his stead. He is the kind of man who does not need to confess. He organizes. Amma immediately understands one thing. She is there because she has a skill, and she is in danger because she has eyes. On a plantation, a slave's skill is tolerated as long as it does not become a memory. The system accepts hands. It refuses witnesses. She works, she cleans, she binds tissues, she assesses blood loss, the rhythm of breathing. She does what is expected of her, maintain the merchandise in good condition. But at the same time, she counts. She records. She fixes in her mind the details that should not exist, the iron bowls, the marks on the floor, the way Sela's crow avoids walking on certain areas as if he already knew the traces, the way Gideon Ashwood does not look at the injured person as a man but as a stage. And above all, a detail that sounds like a verdict: in a corner a rope, not a work rope, a prepared rope, and near this rope a damp folded cloth, as if preparing to erase. This is the heart of this case, not only the violence but the preparation for oblivion. The crime, then the cleaning of the crime, then life resuming as if nothing had happened. This is how an order holds. It strikes, then it denies, then it demands to be called civilization. Amma emerges alive that night, but she does not emerge unscathed, because she understands. She understands that there is a second plantation within the plantation, a nocturnal, ritualistic plantation where fear is cultivated, not Cain, and that she, Amma Kofi, has become a risk, not because she spoke, but because she saw. The day after that April night in 1833, she is sent back to the infirmary as if the night had never happened. This is the method: compartmentalize. Separate the scenes to prevent a narrative, but Amma is not just a practitioner. She is a woman who knows that memory can be a weapon. In the free world, a written note is a note. Here, it is an act of war. Yet she begins to do what lucid survivors do. She transforms every detail into an internal file, every date into a nail, every symptom into a clue. And I will state it clearly, this is not a plantation legend. It is not a story told to frighten oneself. It is a coherent mechanism that fits perfectly into the moral economy of slavery. When a man owns bodies, he often ends up believing he also owns the sacred. When the law protects him, he invents rituals. When no one can contradict him, he takes himself for a god. And around him, others choose, close their eyes to keep their place, or look and lose their minds. In April 1833, Amma does not yet have a network. She does not yet have a plan. She only has this heavy certainty: something is brewing on Ashwood, and it has already begun. The question is not if it will happen again. The question is who will be the next name erased, and who will have the courage not to let the erasure win. If you're listening from outside Louisiana or outside the United States, comment where you're from and subscribe, because what Amma Kofi walked into in 1833 wasn't an isolated horror. It was a system confident enough to hold ceremonies inside its own walls. And systems like that only fear one thing: a record that survives them. May 1833. On Ashwood Plantation there is no talk of what happened in April, not because no one knows, but because everyone understands the rule. Here, silence is not an absence of words. It is a condition for survival. However, silence does not erase facts. It locks them away. And when a fact is confined, it begins to rot, to repeat itself, to infect everything else. This is exactly what is happening. Amma Kofi returns to her deliveries, her fevers, her compresses, as if the night at the account house had been merely a parenthesis. But her gaze has changed. She no longer simply provides care. She observes. She listens to the corridors. She monitors schedules. She learns to recognize the signals of a system that prepares an act even before it occurs. On a plantation, everything is procedure: harvest, punishment, prayer, and disappearance. By the end of May 1833, she notices the first pattern. The nights she was called to the account house are not chosen at random. They coincide with very specific events: a drop in yield, a rumor of illness, an altercation, a public punishment. As if, with each imbalance, the master sought to repair order through a ceremony. It is the word people dare not utter but can guess from the actions: ceremony, a staging, a supposed necessity. The crime, disguised as a ritual so that those who commit it can look at themselves in the mirror without vomiting. June 1833. The air is heavy, the fields absorb sweat and exude fatigue. And in this heat another presence arrives, clean, fragrant, outwardly reassuring: Reverend Elias Moore, 35 years old, a visiting pastor, the kind of man called upon when one wishes to bestow a blessing upon violence. He preaches to the white people, he consoles the enslaved, he speaks of patience, salvation, obedience. All this vocabulary serves only one purpose: to prevent victims from transforming their pain into accusation. Amma observes him from a distance at first. She sees him shake Gideon Ashwood's hand, smile at Sela's crow, walk confidently on land where others are not even allowed to look up. She hears his phrases, those phrases that claim to unite but always draw a line. God tests, God corrects, God has a plan. In the mouth of a free man, these words are tools. In the ears of an enslaved woman, they are additional chains. Then comes the first phrase that drops the mask. One evening in June 1833, Amma is called again, not for a birth, for an incident. And in a corridor she overhears Elias Moore tell Gideon Ashwood in a low voice like pastoral advice, "Order must be preserved. Disorder attracts evil. That's it. When a man of God begins to speak like an accountant of fear, he does not bless life. He blesses control." From that moment, Amma understands that this situation is not just about an isolated master with his obsessions. It concerns a network of complicity, a solid triangle: the owner who orders, the overseer who executes, and the religious figure who covers, by word or omission. The plantation is not a solitary crime. It is an institution that dresses itself to appear normal. The list appears at this stage. It does not fall from the sky. It emerges from Ashwood's internal logic. Everything is written, everything is counted, everything is recorded. Even what must remain clandestine leaves a trace, because the powerful do not know how to operate without registers. They want to dominate the world as one manages an inventory. And that is where their arrogance becomes their weakness. They leave lines behind. In early June 1833, Amma is sent to the main house to check on a suffering servant. It is a pretext. They keep her busy. They move her. They distance her from the infirmary. And as she passes through an office, a room where no one should leave her alone, she glimpses an open register for only a few seconds on a table. She does not read everything. She does not have time, but she sees enough to understand. Names, not names of purchases, not harvest tallies. Names of enslaved people listed separately with short, dry annotations that do not resemble medical notes. Cora, Isaac, Bess, Tomlin, and opposite them remarks: to be moved, to be isolated, night, pavilion. Nothing romantic, nothing mystical written in black and white, just the cold administration of a selection. What this list means is simple and monstrous. The victims do not disappear randomly. They are designated, and designation is proof of intent, not an accident, not a fight gone wrong, a plan. Amma cannot steal the register. She cannot copy it entirely. She cannot run away with it. That would be death. So she does what people destined for annihilation do. She memorizes. She engraves the names in her mind. She associates a face with each syllable. Because on Ashwood the master controls bodies, but he does not yet completely control memory. Not if someone decides to make it a fortress. From June 1833 she begins to connect the dots. Cora, 19 years old, often assigned to the main house, visible, coveted, therefore vulnerable. Isaac, young, robust, a useful carpenter, the kind of person who is punished as an example when the workshop is perceived to be whispering too much. Bess, an older woman known for speaking to children, thus dangerous through transmission. Tomlin, a man who sometimes drives the animals, who knows the paths. None are chosen because they are weak. They are chosen because they matter, because they connect others, because they carry influence. The plantation does not only sacrifice individuals, it targets nodes in the enslaved people's social fabric. And meanwhile, Reverend Moore preaches. He preaches about obedience, humility, submission. He preaches while names move across a page like pawns. And this contrast is the heart of the moral accusation. When a man meant to protect souls becomes an anesthetic for conscience, he is no longer a pastor. He is a piece of the mechanism. Late June 1833 brings an episode that solidifies everything. One night, Amma is awakened by unusual movement. Rapid footsteps, whispers the creaking cart. She sees Sela's crow pass with two men armed with lanterns. She sees a third man, bound, head down. She does not immediately distinguish his face. But the next day she learns, Isaac did not show up for work. No one says where he is. No one says he is dead. The vocabulary narrows. He was transferred, he was corrected, he was taken away. Verbs that make the subject disappear. And that is when Amma understands the second layer of the crime, erasure. On Ashwood, violence is not enough. The trace of violence must also be erased so that the system can continue without friction. No grave, no permitted mourning, no narrative. The master does not merely want to kill bodies. He wants to prevent survivors from transforming death into memory and memory into revolt. I say it directly. This list, these nights, this pastor, this pavilion, all of it forms a structure, and in every structure there is a breaking point. But before the break there is the vice. June 1833 ends with a certainty. The names exist, the dates exist, the movements exist. And Amma Kofi, a woman whom the law refuses to recognize as a witness, unwittingly becomes the living archive of a crime that the plantation believed left no trace. It must be repeated because this is precisely what the system wants to prevent. Cora, Isaac, Bess, Tomlin. May 1833, pattern. June 1833, list. Ashwood Plantation does not operate only with whips and fields. It operates with a bureaucracy of shadows and a facade of religion. And when violence begins to write its own names, it is no longer a rumor. It is a case file. The question now is not whether Amma was a witness. She was. The question is, how long can a woman alone carry evidence in her mind before the system notices and decides that the witness, too, must disappear? Because this is always the rule of guilty places. After the victims, they go after those who remember. And to remember here becomes a moral act, a responsibility, a refusal to let the plantation win a second time. July 1833. The heat pressed down on Ashwood Plantation like a lid. The fields breathed sweat, the cabins breathed fear, and the main house breathed impunity. When summer arrived, the masters spoke of yield. The slaves, for their part, spoke of survival. And Amma Kofi, 28 years old, an enslaved midwife, understood a truth that books did not tell. On a plantation, medicine was not merely care. It was authorization to move about, an excuse to approach bodies, a chance to hear what others did not hear, access. And access in a world of prohibitions became a weapon. Since April 1833, she carried a secret in her mind. Iron bowls, marks on the ground, a cut body, a closed pavilion, a calm master, a methodical overseer. Since June 1833, she carried a list: Cora, Isaac, Bess, Tomlin. These were no longer impressions. They were facts. And in July, she made a silent decision. If the plantation was held together by its records, it would be broken by the archive. Even if this archive had to be tiny, even if it had to be clandestine. Even if, for an enslaved woman, writing was already a transgression. She began with what she knew, symptoms and schedules. A midwife knew how to read a body like one reads a confession. She saw when a fever was not a marsh fever but a fever of deprivation. She distinguished an accidental injury from a punitive injury. She recognized the signs of a failed strangulation, of shock, of overly rapid blood loss. And above all, she noted what the plantation could not completely erase: the repetition, the regularity, the rhythm of night calls, the incidents that accumulated just before certain nights. In early July 1833, a man returned to the infirmary with marked wrists, evasive eyes, and an overly dry mouth. Officially, he fell. Unofficially, his body told another story. Amma could not say torture aloud, but she could write abraded wrists, edema, painful breathing, time after midnight. What she was doing there was counter-administration. The plantation wrote to possess. Amma wrote to accuse. She had no notebook, no paper of her own, no ink. She improvised, packaging scraps stolen from the kitchens, pieces of flour sacks, strips of clean fabric reserved for compresses. She used the margins of the world because the official world was forbidden to her. And she chose a language that did not resemble a direct accusation because a direct accusation would get her killed. She encoded the truth in medical terms: dates, times, signs, odors, state of consciousness. The plantation wanted slaves to be nothing more than bodies. Amma transformed bodies into documents. July 1833 was also the month she understood that evidence must not remain in the same place as the witness. As long as everything was in her head, she was alone. And alone, she was vulnerable. But if she managed to create a material trace, however fragile, then the system would have to fight something more dangerous than a whisper: proof. She began to collect what no one would think to call evidence. A stained piece of fabric kept after a suspicious night, a cut string found near the infirmary too thick for ordinary use, ashes in a small cloth because a smell of burning lingered after certain nights, details, fragments. It was not spectacular. This was precisely what made it credible. Truth was not a performance, it was an accumulation. And that is where the morality of this record became heavier. Because to do this, Amma had to walk a fine line, remain useful enough to survive, but clear-headed enough not to become the master's docile instrument. She healed, yes. She stitched. She calmed. She saved when she could. But she inwardly rejected the idea that healing meant whitewashing what had been done. Every dressing she placed on a body wounded by the system could become an act of complicity if she allowed the system to erase the narrative. She would not let erasure win. She was not alone for long, not because she trusted easily, but because survival sometimes created alliances without words. Martha Moss Delaney, 30 years old, cook in the main house, saw her one evening carefully fold a stained cloth instead of throwing it away. Martha understood immediately. The kitchen on a plantation was a place where white people spoke as if they were alone. Secrets passed through pots, through trays, through leftovers. Martha was used to remembering what they wanted her to forget. Martha did not ask why, she asked where. Where to hide, where to pass, where to place. A complicity born from the same obvious truth: if no one kept a record, no one could ever accuse. And when justice was forbidden, victims were forced to construct their own internal tribunal. Soon after, Josiah Reed entered the constellation. 26 years old, a cart driver. He drove, he transported, he moved about more than others. He knew the paths, the patrol schedules, the blind spots. He did not speak much. But his silence was not submission. It was the prudence of a man who knew that a single word could cost a life. Josiah accepted a simple task: to move without understanding, to carry without looking, to deliver without being seen. This clandestine network did not resemble a novel. It resembled what terror imposed: short actions, minimal instructions, a trust built on necessity. By mid-July 1833, Amma established a method. Every suspicious event received 3 markers: a date, an approximate time, and a name associated with the list or its surroundings. If she did not have the name, she described: young woman, scar on cheek; tall man, limp. Because the plantation loved anonymity, Amma, for her part, created identification. And in those days she discovered another disturbing truth. The ceremonies did not only leave dead people, they left damaged survivors. People who returned with broken gazes, tremors, silences heavier than chains. These became living evidence, but also threats, because a survivor could speak. So the plantation did what it always did. It watched, it intimidated, it moved people. Cora, 19 years old, appeared more often near the main house. Too often. Amma saw fine marks on her forearms, like repeated pressures, not open blows. She recognized coercion. Cora lowered her eyes when spoken to. She answered yes even before the question. These were signs of a body already trained to anticipate violence. And Amma noted: July 1833, Cora, signs of coercion, nights of absence, return at dawn. Each line was an act of resistance. Reverend Elias Moore still preached. But in July, his presence took on a more precise form. He became a moral excuse for suffering. He visited the cabins, he uttered words of consolation. He spoke of sin, temptation, and correction. The misfortune was that some slaves wanted to believe these words because believing gave meaning to pain. Amma, for her part, saw the trap. To give meaning to cruelty was to make it acceptable, and to make cruelty acceptable was to prolong the crime. The month ended with a gesture that sealed Amma's intention. She took out, for the first time, a trace beyond her own space. A small note, folded, hidden in a hem, not an entire narrative, just a series of dates and names like a seed of a file. April 1833, accounting pavilion, iron bowls, gashes. June 1833, list Cora, Isaac, Bess, Tomlin. July 1833, nocturnal returns, marks of coercion. She did not yet know where this seed would grow. But she knew this. As long as everything remained on Ashwood, Ashwood could crush everything. And that is where the moral tone asserted itself, without poetry, without detour. Because what Kofi did in July 1833 was not merely courageous. It was an obligation of memory. Systems of oppression thrived on two things: force and oblivion. Force broke bodies. Oblivion broke narratives. And when narratives were broken, crimes became repeatable. So Amma wrote, she collected, she encoded, she transmitted, not to become a heroine in a story, to refuse that human beings become mere rumors, so that the names Cora, Isaac, Bess, Tomlin would not be swallowed by the same machine that swallowed everything else. July 1833, on Ashwood, medicine ceased to be merely care. It became a strategy, and memory ceased to be a burden. It became an accusation that, sooner or later, would have to find a way out. August 1833. At Ashwood, summer no longer just crushes, it tightens its grip. When a system feels observed, it doesn't become more cautious, it becomes more cruel. Masters do not fear sin, they fear evidence. And from the beginning of August, something in the air around Kofi changes. Nocturnal calls become rarer but more strained. Movements are more closely monitored. Faces become stern. This is not a return to calm. It is the preparation of a trap. Amma made the mistake every witness eventually makes. She began to exist as more than just a function. In July 1833, she wrote, she collected, she transmitted a fragment. And even if no one catches her with her hand in the cloth, the plantation senses anomalies like a beast smells fire. An order built on control doesn't need proof to punish. Suspicion is enough. Silas Crow embodies this suspicion. 38 years old, steward, man of rounds and keys, a man who doesn't shout, he assesses, he verifies, he makes silences speak. In August, he begins to stay closer to the infirmary, not openly, as if by chance. He appears just as Amma changes a dressing. He asks useless questions. Why is this cloth missing? Why is this pot empty? Why was this woman seen later than usual? On a plantation, these types of questions are not management. They are a hunt. And the master, Gideon Ashwood, 42 years old, doesn't dirty his hands with interrogations. He prefers tests, because tests have an appearance of justice. One can always say afterward, she failed. And in a world where enslaved people have no rights, failing becomes a convenient crime. The trap is set in mid-August 1833. A man is brought to the infirmary at an unusual hour, accompanied by Silas Crow himself. Officially, it's a work accident. Unofficially, Amma understands in a second. He was chosen for her. The injured man is too damaged. Shortness of breath, cold skin, signs of advanced shock. This is not a patient they want to save. This is a patient they want her to bear as a burden. The order is simple, stark. Keep him alive. Not save him, not help him. Keep him alive. Because the objective is not life. The objective is to observe Amma, to measure her reaction, to see if she takes notes, if she investigates, if she speaks. The system hands her a body like one hands a rope, to see if she will take the bait. Amma works because she has no choice. She applies compresses, tries to stabilize him, gives water drop by drop, monitors his pulse. But she sees the deception. Even if she succeeds, they will say she succeeded too well. And if she fails, they will say she sabotaged. It's the perfect structure of persecution. Whatever the outcome, guilt is already predetermined. The man dies before dawn, not because Amma is incapable, but because he was brought too late, too broken, too depleted, and in the morning the trap closes. Silas Crow does not shout, he does not strike immediately, he does worse, he insinuates, he implies that Amma delayed, that she hesitated, that she didn't do everything she could. And this insinuation on a plantation is a pending condemnation. From that day in August 1833, Amma hears a phrase spreading around her, whispered by the most cautious. Don't treat too well. It is a monstrous phrase because it reveals Ashwood's logic. If an enslaved person treats too well, she becomes indispensable, therefore dangerous, therefore watched. If she treats not enough, she becomes guilty, therefore punishable. So they are taught a twisted survival to be useful but not brilliant, to be effective but not visible, to be alive but not defiant. And yet Amma cannot afford this strategic mediocrity, because her clandestine mission demands the opposite: to observe precisely, to act precisely, to write precisely. She must therefore invent another tactic, to appear ordinary while remaining exact in the shadows. It is an art of dissimulation imposed by terror. Surveillance intensifies. Late August 1833, Silas Crow has the infirmary searched. Not a brutal search, not a ransacking, a clean inspection. He looks under the straw mattresses, he checks the linens, he counts the vials. He searches less for objects than for inconsistencies. The plantation does not fear a pistol. It fears a piece of paper, a fragment of a sentence, a date. Martha Moss Delaney also senses the danger. The kitchen becomes a place of tension. Leftovers are counted, bags are checked, movements are restricted. When one wants to stifle a leak of information, one begins by cutting off ordinary channels: food, laundry, chores. Everything that circulates is suspicious, and everything suspicious must be immobilized. Josiah Reed, the cart driver, is followed. His routes are changed. Stops are imposed on him. He is asked to justify the slightest detour. And again, Ashwood's method is simple: isolate the nodes of the network even before proving that a network exists. This is how tyrannies function. They don't wait for evidence. They manufacture preventative fear. In this atmosphere, a disappearance occurs that is no longer just an event, but a message. One evening in late August 1833, Amma hears a word, whispered by an overseer, half swallowed: offering. This word should not exist in the vocabulary of a Christian plantation, and yet it emerges like an overflowing truth. That night, a man is taken. A man everyone recognizes, even if it is forbidden to say his name: Isaac. Isaac was already on the list in June. He is now taken. The logic is confirmed. They don't correct Isaac, they remove him from the world. And the next day the plantation offers the most violent spectacle of all: the complete absence of any trace. No mention, no authorized rumor, no body. The enslaved people immediately understand what this means. They don't just want to make him disappear, they want to erase the very possibility of speaking his name. This absence is a technique. Erase the body, erase the narrative, erase the community. For a community that cannot bury cannot mourn, and a community that cannot mourn cannot gather. That is the real objective: to break the bonds. Amma notes mentally at first, then as soon as she can, on a hidden scrap of paper: late August 1833, Isaac taken, word heard, offering, no return, no trace. This line seemingly is just a note. In reality, it is an act of defiance. It is saying, I refuse for the erasure to be total. But this defiance has a price. After Isaac, the pressure on Amma becomes personal. Gideon Ashwood finally addresses her with the most subtle threat: not a blow, not an insult. A sentence spoken calmly as one gives advice: on this plantation some heal, and others disappear. It is the art of domination, to pass terror off as a natural law, like rain or night, as if disappearing were a normal consequence of the world and not a criminal choice. The trap thus has two parts in August 1833: guilt by the patient's death and intimidation by Isaac's disappearance. One aims to tarnish Amma, the other aims to terrorize her. Together they seek to obtain what masters always want: internal breakdown, capitulation. The moment when the witness tells herself, it's no use. It is here that the moral dimension must be stated directly, because Ashwood is not sustained solely by Gideon Ashwood. It is sustained by the chain of those who accept. Silas Crow, who organizes. Reverend Elias Moore, who preaches obedience in a world built on crime. The neighbors who close their eyes as long as the sugar arrives, as long as the order remains clean. This case indicts a structure, not an impulse. And Amma, in the midst of it, still holds on. August 1833 doesn't transform her into a flamboyant heroine. It transforms her into a hardened witness. She now understands that her survival depends on one thing: never letting the system control what she knows. They can monitor her steps. They can count her linens. They can threaten her loved ones. But as long as she keeps the memory, as long as she keeps the dates, as long as she keeps the names, the plantation has not won. There remains the darkest question, one that August imposes. How long can a witness remain standing when the system has decided to make their existence a permanent trap? At Ashwood, the answer is never given aloud. It is read in the absences, and in the fact that, from now on, Kofi no longer writes merely to prove. She writes to save. Because if Isaac was taken, then the list is no longer a hypothesis. It is a calendar, and a calendar on a plantation always announces the next night. September 1833. After August, Ashwood no longer resembles an orderly plantation. It looks like a scene being cleaned up even before the crime is reported. Patrols become more frequent. Questions become more precise. Keys jingle more often on Silas Crow's belt, as if the metal itself wants to remind everyone who controls the doors, drawers, and exits. And it is in this climate that Kofi's strategy changes. Evidence must no longer merely exist. It must get out. Evidence confined to Ashwood is not evidence. It is a future corpse. Understood the system's logic. People are selected, moved, corrected, then erased. Isaac disappeared at the end of August 1833, and this disappearance has a secondary effect that the master always seeks. It terrorizes potential witnesses. People stop asking questions, stop looking, stop uttering names. Gideon Ashwood does not just want victims. He wants silent survivors. Yet, silence does not stop Amma. It makes her colder, more methodical, more dangerous. In September 1833, she no longer writes as a woman who hopes. She writes as a woman who accuses. Dates, times, bodily marks. She reduces her language to the essential because the slightest unnecessary word is a risk. She adopts a rule: never a complete note on her person, never a complete note in the same place, fragmenting the truth so that it survives. It is a resistance technique born of oppression. If one piece is confiscated, another remains elsewhere. Martha Moss Delaney becomes the first safeguard of this clandestine system. 30 years old, working in the main house kitchen. She does not transport evidence as one would transport an object. She transports everyday items. And that is precisely why it works. The plantation monitors weapons, escapes, angry men. It monitors a cook leaving with trash, rags, bags less closely. The system's racism blinds it to certain actions. And it is in this blind spot that Martha slips the fragments. A date sewn into a hem, a name scribbled between two wrapping papers, an annotation hidden in an apron lining. Josiah Reed, a 26-year-old cart driver, serves as a mobile bridge. In September, his routes are more controlled, but he still has leeway, logistical necessities. He transports bags of flour, crates, tools. He knows the posts where white men tire of checking. He knows that boredom is a weakness. He also knows that trust must be minimal. He does not read everything. He does not ask everything. He takes. He hides. He passes. A clandestine network that survives is not a talkative network. It is a silent mechanism. But the mechanism needs an external point, an exit, and that is where Étienne Boucher appears, September 1833. 33 years old, a French-speaking clerk at a river warehouse, a man of the waterfront accustomed to crates, receipts, goods changing hands without changing form. The river in Louisiana is a highway of sugar and a highway of rumors. Étienne works near bags of flour, barrels, ropes. He does not belong to Ashwood, but he depends on its transactions. He is not a hero, not at first. He is a man who believes he lives on the margins of crime, until crime comes knocking at his margin. The first contact is not theatrical, it is practical. A minuscule note hidden in a bag found because Étienne has the eye of people who count. A series of names and dates unembellished. April 1833, accounts pavilion. June 1833, list. Late August 1833, Isaac taken, offering. Étienne first understands a simple thing. Someone is risking their life for these words to exist. And in a world built to dehumanize, the mere fact of risking one's life for a name is a moral shock. But he hesitates, because hesitation is human, because the slaveholding order does not only crush slaves, it buys the comfort of free people with fear. If Étienne speaks, he could lose his job, his security, his life. And here the narration must be clear. This system does not only hold through the master's violence, it holds through the calculations of those not directly affected. It holds through the "I saw nothing" of people who have seen enough. Étienne is confronted with this moral boundary. October 1833. The network expands, and so does the danger, because the more truth circulates, the more of a scent it leaves. And Silas Crow, the overseer, knows how to recognize the scent of a leak. He does not need to discover a note to initiate a hunt. It is enough for behaviors to change: a more tense cook, a more precise cart driver, a more cautious midwife. The system reads bodies as Amma reads symptoms. The plantation has its own medicine, a medicine of suspicion. In early October, searches become less administrative and more aggressive. Mattresses overturned, linens counted, corners inspected. They are no longer just looking for inconsistencies. They are looking for any proof, whatever it may be, to justify an exemplary punishment. For an exemplary punishment does not target the guilty individual. It targets others. It targets the contagion of the idea that one can resist. Martha Moss is the first to be tested. Not officially arrested, just detained, questioned. They make her wait standing. They ask her where she was, why she took a particular path, why she spoke to Amma at a specific time. The questions are superficial, but their purpose is clear: to make it understood that the slightest thread will be pulled until someone is strangled. And there, Silas Crow utters a phrase not spoken in front of white people, but spoken to slaves like a law. Here, even the truth must pay a blood tax. It is not a metaphor. It is a program. From this moment, Amma's network must function like a besieged cell. Transmissions are reduced. Messages are shortened. Days when patrols are busy elsewhere are chosen. Fragments are passed along with the most innocent objects: flour, fabric, soap, ropes. Truth becomes contraband because the system has made information a crime. And Amma at the center feels the cost of this strategy. Each fragment sent is a victory but also a threat. For if the system discovers that the midwife writes, it will destroy her, not only to punish her, but to deter any other future memory. Slavery does not tolerate archives. It needs every pain to be isolated, private, without consequence. This is how it perpetuates itself, by transforming repeated crimes into unrecorded events. In October 1833, Amma makes a more radical decision. She begins to structure her notes as a file intended for release, not just as a survival journal. She organizes by month: April, June, August, September, October. She associates names with occurrences. She highlights repetition: Cora seen at night, returning at dawn. Isaac disappeared after the word offering. Bess moved to the main house, then absent one night. Tomlin assigned to special chores, then silence. She constructs a chronology because chronology is the enemy of lies. Lies favor vague stories. Chronology forces intent. Meanwhile, Étienne Boucher, despite himself, becomes a black box. He keeps what he can, hides what he receives, without yet knowing to whom to hand it over. He understands that he cannot simply go see a sheriff. The sheriff in these lands is often a moral cousin of the master. The law protects property, not truth. So he looks for another way out. A contact, a merchant, a man of letters, someone who has an interest in not depending on Ashwood. What the system has created is a situation where truth must travel like a fugitive. The end of October 1833 marks a turning point. The plantation tightens its grip so much that it ultimately reveals its fear. Gideon Ashwood speaks of order more than ever. Elias Moore preaches about purity and temptation. Silas Crow increases patrols. Knives are confiscated, movements are restricted, certain gatherings are forbidden. All of this is not agricultural discipline. It is a response to an invisible threat, the idea that someone somewhere is compiling a file. And that is exactly what is happening. The path for evidence now exists. It is not safe. It is not fast. It is fragmented, but it exists. And in a universe where everything is designed to prevent a black woman from leaving a trace, the mere fact that a trace emerges from Ashwood is a scandal. It is necessary to emphasize the moral aspect here, without lyricism, without circumlocution. Because what Kofi does in September and October 1833 is not to tell a story. It is to prevent crime from becoming normalized. It is to refuse to let names be swallowed up. It is to remind, through method, through date, through detail, that each victim was a person, not a unit of labor. And if this file has a purpose, it is this: to force the world to look at what it has paid for too long with sugar and silence. On Ashwood, truth has become contraband, and each fragment that emerges is an accusation moving inch by inch toward the light, even if the light here burns as much as it saves. November 1833. On Ashwood, this month does not arrive like a calendar. It arrives like a threat. After September and October, the plantation tightened its grip. Increased patrols, more frequent searches, controlled movements, more emphatic sermons, and the common feeling that the very air was listening. But in the heart of November, Kofi understood something else, more precise, more chilling. The upcoming ceremony was not a possibility. It was a deadline, an appointment, an act scheduled like a delivery. It all began with tiny clues, those that only the oppressed learn to read. An excess of candles ordered for the main house. Iron bowls moved not to the infirmary but to a locked shed. New ropes appearing without any agricultural reason. A foreman who spoke of an important night before falling silent. And above all, a sequence of behaviors. Gideon Ashwood became calmer. Sela's crow became more present. Elia's moor became more fervent. When the tormentors feel secure, they pray. When they pray, it is not to ask for forgiveness. It is to grant themselves permission. Amma could not prove with a signature what was going to happen. She did not need to. She already had the logic, declining yields, rumors of fever, the need to re-establish order. November 1833 corresponded exactly to this pattern. The fields had suffered, discipline had weakened, murmurs had circulated since Isaac's disappearance at the end of August. The system always responded in the same way: punish, frighten, erase. And this time, it would do so with a staged event, a ritualized violence intended to terrorize more than to kill. The question was no longer how to prove. The question became who to save. This is where the matter ceased to be merely an investigation. It became a survival operation. And this shift was morally unbearable. An enslaved woman, a midwife, found herself doing what free society claimed to reserve for courts and authorities, selecting human priorities in a world that recognized none of her rights. The names of those targeted became clear. Cora, 19 years old, Ben, 32 years old, Lottie, 14 years old. 3 different profiles, the same logic, people who mattered, who connected, who could carry a message or inspire loyalty. Cora had been brought closer to the main house, thus exposed to the master's private violence. Ben was a strong man, known for calming disputes, thus capable of preventing total panic, exactly the kind of stability the plantation wanted to break. Lottie was young, too young, but already observant, already dangerous because of the future she represented. On Ashwood, they did not just kill people for who they were. They killed what they could become. Amma understood that she could not protect them with medicine alone. A bandage does not stop a rope. An herbal tea does not neutralize armed men and a steward who holds the keys. An extraction plan was needed, not a heroic plan. A dirty, cautious, realistic plan to hijack the very mechanisms of the plantation. To use the master's obsession with hygiene as a cover. To use the fear of epidemics as a screen. November 1833, week 1, Amma began to speak of quarantine. She did not pronounce the word in front of just anyone. She slipped it to Martha Moss Delaney, then to Josiah Reed. She recalled episodes of fever, evoked contagion, insisted on the risk to the main house. The masters could ignore a slave's suffering, but they feared a disease that would reach their own beds. This was the raw truth. Hygiene became a moral flaw. White lives were protected, and in this selfish effort, a door was sometimes opened that slaves could cross. The plan took shape in 3 stages. First stage, isolate the targets under medical pretense. Cora had a fever, Ben coughed blood, Lottie had chills. Amma could fabricate signs, amplify symptoms, use plants to cause redness, a temporary state of weakness, enough for the main house to accept the idea of isolation. It was manipulation, yes, but in a world where truth was criminalized, cunning became a form of justice. Second stage, move them. Josiah Reed held the practical key, a medical cart loaded with linens, buckets, vials. On a plantation, no one wanted to touch such a load. The fear of disease deterred even men who enjoyed dominating. If Amma obtained permission to transport the sick to an isolation area, she could get them out of monitored zones, bring them closer to the swamps, the reeds, the river, where dogs lost the scent, where the night swallowed silhouettes. Third stage, erase the movement, not to flee like a scream, to flee like a routine. The cart would leave at a plausible hour. It would take a logical path. It would stop where no one wished to go. Then the bodies would descend and the rest belonged to the swamps. This plan was fragile. A single suspicion, one extra patrol, and everything would collapse. And in November 1833, suspicion was everywhere. Silas Crow was the constant threat. He was not just a supervisor. He was a reader of behaviors. He observed faces, delays, exchanged glances. He knew something was brewing even if he did not know what. And he knew a fundamental rule of oppression. Resistance leaves microdisorders. A bucket placed in the wrong spot. A missing rag. A person coughing too much at the right moment. Crow did not seek the truth. He sought an opportunity to strike. Amma therefore had to do a terrible thing. Involve the minimum number of people. She could not warn the entire plantation. She could not alert all the families. If she did, she would create a noise that Crow would detect. This was the cruel arithmetic of clandestinity. Saving a few sometimes required silencing the possibility of saving all others. And this dilemma was not a theoretical question. It played out on lives with dates in real mud under real lanterns. Week 2 of November 1833, Amma initiated the isolation. Cora was declared feverish. Ben was at risk. Lottie too fragile to stay in the dormitory. She did just enough to convince the foreman without alerting them. She insisted on the main house. If it spreads, it will reach your homes. This sentence in the mouth of an enslaved person was a poison calculated for white selfishness. And it worked, because slavery could tolerate Black death, but it panicked at a threat that crossed the color line. Martha Moss prepared linens, pieces of bread, sachets of salt. Simple things. No luxury, no weapons. The fugitives did not need weapons for the first hours. They needed to walk water, silence. Josiah Reed observed the patrols, mentally noting the hours when the men drank, when fatigue made their eyes less attentive. He knew that the best moments were not the darkest, but the most ordinary, when no one imagined anyone would dare. Week 3 of November 1833, pressure mounted. Elias Moore preached about purity and correction. He spoke more of punishment than of salvation. He uttered phrases that resembled coded warnings. Evil hides in whispers. Disobedience calls for divine wrath. This rhetoric was not neutral. It psychologically prepared for violence. It presented it as a moral necessity. And this is where the record accused. When religion was used to legitimize cruelty, it became an accomplice. It became the incense that masked the smell of blood. The day before the supposed deadline, Amma noticed a detail that confirmed everything. A discreet movement towards the accounting pavilion. Men carrying something heavy covered. A new rope. An iron bowl never seen in broad daylight. The system was being put in place. Rituals are not improvised, they are prepared. And this simple fact, the preparation, proved the intention, proved premeditation, proved that they were not talking about an accident or anger. They were talking about a protocol. So Amma accelerated. She knew that time was no longer an ally. She also knew that saving Cora, Ben, and Lottie might not be enough. But she knew what the system wanted to steal from her, the very possibility of action. and if she succumbed to paralysis, all would be lost. The extraction plan became imminent. A cart ready, a medical pretense, bodies concealed under linens, a route towards the swamps. Fear was not a detail, it was everywhere, in the throat, in the hands, in the way of breathing. Amma was not an armed combatant. She was a woman with plants, dates, and a determination born not of romanticism but of necessity. On Ashwood in November 1833, morality was not a discourse. It was a choice, to let the system designate or to disobey, to snatch a few lives from the machine. And it must be said, because memory demands ruthless clarity, if Amma had to lie about symptoms to save children and adults destined for an offering, that lie was closer to justice than all the official truths of the plantation. For Ashwood's truth, that which the records showed, was merely a mask. The real truth was in the disappearances, in the lists, in the iron bowls, in the new ropes, in the closed pavilion. And now in that waiting cart, ready to become a border between life and erasure. November 1833 ended at the edge of this border. The ceremony approached. The path was traced. The matter was in motion. And in the swamps, the night was not just darkness. It was the only protection the system had never fully managed to possess. December 1833. People like to believe that plantation stories have neat conclusions. A successful escape, a master punished, justice arriving late. This is a comfort. The reality is more cruel, more administrative, more enduring. On Ashwood, what transpired between April and December 1833 did not resolve the system. It cracked it. And a crack in a structure built on crime is already a confession extracted from silence. The night of the ceremony, late November 1833, as the first cold air approached, is not an isolated scene. It is the culmination of a chain of events. The list seen in June, Isaac erased in late August, the searches in October, Ashwood's threats, the medical cart prepared as a ruse, the quarantine used as leverage. Everything converged toward a simple point: to prevent Cora, Ben, and Lottie from becoming forgotten names. Amma Kofi does not enter this night with illusions. She knows that the swamps are not a safe haven. They are an ordeal. She knows that dogs exist, that armed men exist, that Sela's crow exists, and that man does not sleep when he senses disobedience. She also knows that Gideon Ashwood, calm and self-assured, has probably prepared countermeasures. A master who practices erasure does not leave exits open. He locks down, he accounts for everything, he anticipates. The cart leaves at an hour that is far from heroic, a plausible hour when the world still seems to follow its routines. Linens over the bodies, buckets to justify the isolation, vials to create the illusion of medical transport. Amma walks beside it, professional posture, face expressionless, like a woman who obeys. It is the necessary mask. On a plantation, the success of escape often relies on the ability to maintain the appearance of order until the last moment. They reach the supposed isolation area, a secluded spot near the reeds, where the humidity swallows footsteps, where sound dissipates. Cora descends first, trembling not just from fear but from months of accumulated exhaustion. Ben follows, heavy, controlling his breathing to avoid coughing. Lottie, 14, holds her fear like a blade, tightly, silently, dangerous if it slips. Amma gives them simple, brief instructions. Walk without speaking, follow the shadows, avoid deep water, do not look back. No promises. Promises on Ashwood are traps. And yet even the best ruse leaves a trace. A single detail suffices. A wheel sinking a little too deep, a stop a little too long, a glance exchanged with Martha Moss Delaney in the kitchen before departure, a moved bucket, an absence noted in a ledger. The plantation is obsessed with its accounts. This is its moral weakness and its practical strength. When an asset is missing, the system reacts. Sela's crow reacts. Even before dawn, he understands that something has slipped through his fingers, not necessarily an escape, a slippage. And he knows exactly where to strike: the infirmary, the kitchen, the cart, Josiah Reed's roots. He does not first look for the fugitives, he looks for the accomplices. Because punishing accomplices is more useful, it dries up future resistance. This is the logic of institutional terrorism. Strike the connections, not just the bodies. That night a fire breaks out. Not a grand fire consuming the main house. The reality is more modest, more tactical. An accidental fire near a shed, enough to create chaos, enough to divert men, enough to send figures running in the wrong direction. On Ashwood, a fire is never merely fire. It is an excuse to move guards, to obscure tracks, to force orders to contradict themselves. In the confusion, Cora, Ben, and Lottie gain a few minutes. And on a plantation, a few minutes can be a line between life and a return to chains. But chaos has a price. When masters panic, they punish blindly. They look for a visible culprit. They look for a head to bring low. The patrols become brutal. Screams replace insinuations. The dogs are unleashed. The quarantine suddenly becomes a suspicious lie. And in this turn of events, Amma understands the darkest part of her victory. Saving lives attracts wrath. And wrath on Ashwood does not disperse. It descends. December 1833 thus begins with two simultaneous realities. On one side, figures disappeared into the swamps, a path to the river, a minuscule but real chance to escape the calendar of offering. On the other, a plantation that closes in more violently than before because it has been humiliated. Systems of oppression tolerate cruelty, but they do not tolerate successful disobedience. Successful disobedience proves that order is not divine, that it is human, that it can crack. Gideon Ashwood covers it up. He does not collapse. He does not regret. He does what men protected by their world do. He rewrites. He transforms the night into disorder, the fire into misfortune, the absences into transfers. He makes causality disappear. He cleanses the links between his actions and their consequences. It is a technique more refined than violence, the official narrative. The official narrative is the ultimate weapon of the powerful. Elias Moore blesses. He blesses the searches. He blesses the punishments. He blesses order, perhaps from conviction, perhaps from cowardice, perhaps from self-interest. Regardless of the psychology, the result is the same. When a man of faith lends his language to domination, he transforms cruelty into duty. He becomes the voice that helps executioners sleep. And this, in a record, must not be embellished. It must be named. Silas Crow punishes, not necessarily immediately, not necessarily spectacularly. He punishes through increased control, through restrictions, through hunger distributed as a lesson, through repeated humiliation. He also punishes through interrogations. Martha Moss is pressured. Josiah Reed is monitored. The cabins are searched. The plantation seeks to rebuild the wall that Amma cracked. And yet something has irreversibly shifted. The evidence is no longer entirely confined to Ashwood. In December 1833, Étienne Boucher possesses fragments, dates, names, disguised medical notes, a chronology, and a chronology is an accusation in itself, because it rejects the master's accidental version. It says, April 1833, accounting pavilion, iron bowls. June 1833, list. Late August 1833, Isaac erased, word offering. September-October 1833, clandestine transmissions, searches, threats. Late November 1833, attempted ceremony, extraction, chaos. December 1833, cover-up and repression. A continuous thread, a continuous intention. This is where the conclusion must be harsh, almost devoid of emotion, because emotion is what the system exploits to distract us. The scandal is not only that Gideon Ashwood could organize ritualized violence. The scandal is that the world around him made it possible, through law, through commerce, through religion, through the habit of treating black lives as objects whose histories are disregarded. If Amma Kofi must risk her life to write on scraps of flour sacks, it is because the official order refused to record her truth. And when an order refuses to record the truth of victims, it becomes the infrastructure of crime. One cannot promise clear justice starting from December 1833. The system is too solid, too complicit, too invested in its own survival. But one can observe the essential. A woman whom society wanted to silence produced an archive. She forced dates into existence. She prevented names from being completely erased. She proved that the plantation, however powerful it may be, does not own everything. It does not entirely own memory as long as someone defends it. And it is here that I leave you with the unsettling question, the one that deserves your theories. Who truly protected Gideon Ashwood? Was it solely Selah's Crow, the steward with the keys? Was it Elias Moore, the pastor with the easy blessing? Or was it a broader circle, neighbors, merchants, local officials, all sustained by sugar and oblivion? Because isolated monsters are rare. Systems, however, are common. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you are listening from. And most importantly, in your opinion, who covered for Ashwood until the very end and why? Share your theories.